She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Dad, nobody asked for your opinion. Just sit there and eat." I was 63 years old. I had laid hardwood floors in his kitchen myself, on my knees for 3 weekends straight, the summer my wife was sick. I had planted the maple tree in the backyard that my son-in-law now complained blocked his satellite signal. I had paid off the mortgage on this house, every last dollar, 4 years before my wife passed. And I was sitting at my own dining table, holding a fork I'd bought, eating food I'd paid for, being told to sit there and eat by my daughter. I put the fork down. I folded my napkin. I pushed back my chair. "Where are you going?" she said. I didn't answer. I walked to the front hallway, took my coat off the hook, picked up my keys from the bowl by the door, the ceramic bowl my wife had painted at one of those studio nights she loved, and I walked out. She called after me twice. Her husband said something I didn't catch. The door closed behind me and the November cold hit my face like a clean thing. I sat in my truck for a moment. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry, not really. I was just done. The way you're done with something when you finally admit to yourself that you've been done for a long time. Let me back up, because this didn't start that night. My wife, Beverly, died 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday and kept a spare 20 in her coat pocket, in case someone needed it, and never told anyone she'd given it. When she died, something went quiet in the house that I never quite got used to. My daughter. I'll call her my daughter because that's what she is, legally and biologically, even if I've had trouble feeling it lately. She's 41. Her name is Simone. She married a man named Garrett 8 years ago. He's in commercial real estate, or he says he is. He talks about deals the way some men talk about the war, constantly, impressively, and with a suspicious shortage of verifiable outcomes. My son, Nolan, is 37. He lives in Kelowna now with his girlfriend. He calls on Sundays, usually. We're fine. He's not part of this story, not really. Except that his absence made the dynamic with Simone worse. He moved away and suddenly I was the only parent left, and Simone treated that like a resource she had exclusive access to. After Beverly died, they suggested I sell the house in Burlington and move into something smaller. I understood the logic. 5 bedrooms for one person is excessive. But Beverly and I had picked that house together when Simone was 3 and Nolan was not yet born. I knew every creak and every floor. I wasn't ready. So instead they moved in. Temporarily, they said. Garrett's development project had a cash flow issue. Nothing serious, just timing. And rather than pull from their investments, wouldn't it make more sense for Dad to help out? Just for a few months? That was 4 years ago. I told myself it made sense. The house was too quiet. Having people in it felt like something. And I loved my daughter. I genuinely did, in the complicated way you love someone who is also exhausting. The months passed. They didn't move out. Garrett's project was always almost there. Simone redecorated the guest room. I mean her room, twice. They got a dog I'm allergic to. The dog sleeps on Beverly's old armchair. I paid for the groceries. I paid the utilities. I paid to have the furnace replaced when it went in February. I was not asked to contribute to any of these things. I simply did it, because it was my house, and I had been taught that you take care of your house and by extension the people in it. What I was not taught, what nobody taught me, and what I wish I had figured out 30 years earlier, is that taking care of people who are perfectly capable of taking care of themselves is not generosity. It is permission. You are giving them permission to stay small, to stay dependent, to treat your goodwill like a utility that runs continuously in the background and costs them nothing. Simone stopped asking if she could have friends over and started telling me they were coming. She stopped cooking meals she knew I didn't like and started cooking only what she and Garrett preferred. She stopped thanking me when I paid for things. It wasn't aggressive, exactly. It was the slow disappearance of manners that happens when people stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a given. I noticed all of it. I said nothing. That was my failure. The night it ended, we had been eating dinner. A Thai curry she'd ordered in, which I was not consulted on, and which I find too spicy. A fact she knew. When I mentioned that I'd been looking at properties in Prince Edward County, a friend of mine from the paper mill days, a man named Roy, had retired out there 5 years ago and kept telling me I'd love it. I'd been thinking about it seriously. I said so. Garrett put down his phone. He ate with his phone propped against the water glass, which I had never once commented on, and said, without looking at me, that it was probably not the right market right now for selling a Burlington house. I wasn't asking about the market, I said. Dad, Simone said, and her voice had that particular tone in it, the one that meant I was about to be managed. Can we talk about this another time? We're eating. I brought it up, I said, because I've been thinking about it for a while and I thought you should know. And that's when she said it. Dad, nobody asked for your opinion. Just sit there and eat. Garrett didn't react. He picked his phone back up. The dog lifted its head from the corner and then put it back down. I sat for a moment with that sentence in the air between us. I turned it over. I thought about whether I had misheard it, or whether it was softer than it landed, or whether there was a context I was missing. There wasn't. I put the fork down. I took my coat. I took my keys. I walked out. I drove to Roy's that night. He lives 2 hours east, past Belleville, and I had not called ahead. But Roy is the kind of man who answers the door at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday and says, "I'll put the kettle on," without asking what happened. He did exactly that. I told him all of it. Not just that night, all of it. 4 years of it. He listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it sounds. When I finished, he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want my house back." He nodded slowly. "Then take it back." It sounds simple. It wasn't. But it was the right thing to say, because it reminded me that the house was mine. The deed was in my name. I had bought it, maintained it, paid it off. I had never signed anything giving anyone else a claim to it. I had simply, gradually, without noticing, stopped acting like it was mine. I stayed with Roy for 3 nights. I slept better than I had in 2 years. On the 4th day, I drove back to Burlington, but I didn't go home. I went to my bank first. I had 4 accounts, a checking account that Simone had signing authority on. I had added her years ago when Beverly got sick, for practical reasons, a personal savings account, a RRSP, and a TFSA. I sat across from an advisor I'd worked with for a long time, a woman named Patricia, and I removed Simone from the checking account. I transferred a meaningful amount into my savings account, which Simone had no access to. I didn't close the checking account. I left enough in it to cover its own fees. I wasn't hiding anything illegal. I was simply reorganizing what was mine. Then I went to see a lawyer. His office was on Brant Street, 3rd floor, a quiet place that smelled like old carpet and coffee. I didn't need anything complicated. I needed to understand my rights as a homeowner when family members were living in my property. The answer, as he explained it, was clear. They were guests, not tenants. Because there was no lease, no formal arrangement, no rent exchanged. As a guest, Simone had no tenancy rights. I could ask them to leave. In Ontario, the rules for this are specific, but they were on my side. I asked him to prepare a letter. It was formal, but not cruel. It stated that the property at the Burlington address was required for the owner's personal use, that the current occupants were asked to vacate within 60 days, and that any belongings not removed by that date would be placed in storage at their expense. 60 days. That felt fair. It was more than fair. While I waited for the letter to be ready, I drove out to Prince Edward County for the weekend to look at properties with Roy. The county is extraordinary in November, gray and cold and wide open, with the lake visible from almost everywhere, and the light falling sideways through bare trees. We looked at 3 places. One of them, a century farmhouse on 7 acres outside of Bloomfield, had a wood stove in the kitchen and a back porch that faced east. I stood on that porch for about 10 minutes without saying anything. Roy said, "I think you've already decided." I had. I made an offer the following Tuesday. With the Burlington house and my savings, I could buy it outright. No mortgage, no bank, nothing that required anyone else's signature. The letter arrived at the Burlington house on a Thursday morning. I know this because Patricia from the bank texted me. She lives 3 streets over and had seen the courier van. And then, 20 minutes later, Simone called. I let it ring. She called again. I let that ring too. She called a third time and I answered. "What is this?" she said. Her voice was very controlled, the way it gets when she's frightened. "It's a formal notice," I said. "You have 60 days. Dad," long pause. "Where are you?" "That doesn't matter right now. We need to talk about this. This is, Dad, you can't just." "Simone," I said. "I can. It's my house." She put Garrett on the phone. Garrett explained to me, in the tone he usually reserved for explaining things he assumed I wouldn't understand, that this was not practical. That they had things in motion. That 60 days was not realistic for their situation. I said, "I understand that it's difficult. 60 days. He said some other things. I said, 60 days, again, and then I said goodbye. I turned off my phone for the rest of the afternoon. I was sitting on Roy's dock in the cold, wearing my heavy coat, watching the water. A pair of loons were far out on the lake, moving very slowly. I watched them for a long time. The next few weeks were, I won't pretend they weren't hard. Simone called my brother Victor, who called me and gently suggested that perhaps I was going through something after Beverly, that grief makes people impulsive. I told Victor as calmly as I could that I was not impulsive, that I had thought about this more carefully than I'd thought about most things. He was quiet for a moment and then said, "Okay, I'm here if you need me." That was the right thing to say, and I appreciated him for it. She called Nolan, too. Nolan called me and said, "Dad, I'm not getting in the middle of this, but are you okay?" I said I was better than I'd been in years. He said, "Okay then." That was also the right thing to say. What I hadn't anticipated was the guilt. Not guilt about what I was doing. I felt clearly about that, but a background guilt that I'd spent years building. A belief, somewhere underneath my thinking, that I owed my daughter something indefinite and enormous simply because I was her father, that my resources were somehow her inheritance in advance, that saying no to her or requiring anything of her was a kind of cruelty. I spent a lot of evenings in Roy's kitchen working through that. He'd make tea, or sometimes something stronger, and we'd talk. Roy had his own version of the same story with his brother decades ago. Different details, but the same shape. He said, "The guilt doesn't mean you did something wrong. It means someone taught you that keeping peace was the same as being good." I've thought about that a lot since. Beverly would have found this whole situation agonizing. She was a peacekeeper by nature, the kind of woman who smoothed things over before they had a chance to roughen. But I also think, I have to believe, that she would have seen what happened at the dinner table. She would have seen the years before it. And she would have told me, eventually, that you cannot love someone into treating you well. You can only decide what you're willing to accept. I wish she were here to see the farmhouse. I think she would have loved the porch. The Burlington house sold in February. The market was slow, but the house was well maintained. I'd seen to that. And a young family from Hamilton made an offer within 2 weeks of listing. We closed in April. Simone and Garrett left in January, just before the 60 days were up. They moved into a rental in Oakville. I know this because Nolan told me, not because Simone told me. She did not say goodbye. She did not return the ceramic bowl that had been on the front table. I noticed its absence when I walked through the empty house for the last time. I stood in the kitchen where Beverly had stood 10,000 times. I stood in the hallway where my children had learned to walk. I stood by the back door where the maple tree was visible, dropping the last of its leaves in the November wind. I'd said what I needed to say to this house in my own way over many years. Leaving it was not as hard as I expected. It had already become something different from what it was. I've been in Bloomfield for 7 months now. The farmhouse needed work. The wiring was original, and the back bathroom was a disaster. And I have been learning things I didn't know I still wanted to learn. A neighbor 3 properties down, a woman named June, who grows heritage tomatoes and has very strong opinions about heritage tomatoes, came by with soup in my second week. We have since become the kind of friends who drink coffee on each other's porches and argue pleasantly about things that don't matter. Roy comes by on weekends sometimes. We built a raised bed along the south fence in May. I don't know what I'm doing with it yet, but I'm finding out. My RRSP is intact. My TFSA has grown. The Bloomfield house is mine free and clear. When I eventually stop being here, it will go to both my children equally. Yes, including Simone. Because that is what fairness looks like, separate from how people have treated you. Simone has contacted me twice since January. Once to wish me a happy birthday in a text message that was brief and careful. Once to tell me that she and Garrett were expecting a baby due in August. I did not know how to feel about that, so I sat with it for a while. Then I wrote her a real letter, handwritten, 2 pages, and told her that I was glad, and that I hoped she'd be the kind of mother she had needed her own parents to be, and that the door was open if she wanted to talk, but that I would not be the same person she had sat across from at that dinner table. That man had left with his coat and his keys, and he wasn't coming back. I sealed the envelope and mailed it. Then I went out to the porch and watched the light come across the field. It was a good morning. Most of them are, now. I used to think that love meant absorbing things, that the more you could take, the more silence you could hold, the more dinners you could sit through, the more dismissals you could swallow, the better a father you were. I believed that for a long time. Probably too long. What I understand now, sitting on this porch in Bloomfield with the morning light coming flat across the field, is that absorbing things without limit isn't love. It's just the slow erasure of yourself. And when you erase yourself long enough, people stop seeing you. Not out of malice, necessarily, out of habit, out of the fact that you train them very carefully and very patiently not to have to. That's the part that took me a while to sit with. Simone didn't become who she became in a vacuum. Garrett didn't walk into my house and decide to ignore me on his own. I built the conditions for all of it. Every time I paid without being asked, every time I said nothing when I should have said something, every time I kept the peace instead of keeping my self-respect. I handed them a version of me that had no edges, no expectations, no needs. And then I was surprised when they treated me accordingly. That's not blame. That's just cause and effect, plain as weather. What changed wasn't them. It was me deciding, at 63 years old, standing in my own front hallway holding my own keys, that I was still a person with a right to be treated like one. That decision, quiet, not dramatic, just absolutely firm, was the thing that mattered, not the letter from the lawyer, not the bank visit, not the farmhouse. All of that came after. The real moment was internal. It was the moment I stopped negotiating with the part of me that said I should go back in and apologize. There's something that takes genuine character to do, and it is this, to see yourself clearly, not harshly, not with self-pity, but accurately. To look at the situation you're in and say, honestly, here is what I contributed to this, and here is what I will not contribute anymore. That kind of honesty requires something most of us spend our whole lives avoiding. It's easier to blame. It's easier to be the victim. It's harder and more useful to be the witness. And then there is what it takes to actually move. Knowing something is true and acting on it are completely different things. I knew for years that the arrangement in that house wasn't working. I had the knowledge. What I hadn't built yet was the willingness to let things be uncomfortable for a while. To disappoint people. To sit with their anger without trying to fix it. That's not stubbornness. That's a kind of endurance that most people don't talk about. The quiet, unglamorous work of holding your own ground when everything in you wants to smooth it over. Roy asked me once, that first night over tea, what I wanted. Not what I thought was fair. Not what I deserved. Just what did I want? I hadn't been asked that in years. I had to think about it. What I wanted was to wake up in a place that felt like mine and feel like myself in it. That's all. It wasn't complicated. The complicated part was believing I was still allowed to want it. I think that's what I'd leave anyone with who was listening to this and recognizing something in it. Not some grand lesson. Just the question Roy asked me, what do you want? Not what can you tolerate. Not what's easiest for everyone else. What do you actually want? You're allowed to answer that.